Alright, I have just watched the newest episode for the Rings of Power, titled Udun. No, not the delicious Japanese dish. It's one of the names given to Morgoth's first fortress, more commonly referred to as Utamono, the first hell, which was destroyed by the Valar in preparation for the waking of the elves. And in this episode, a new hell is made as Mount Doom is brought to life and Mordor is created. This episode was the strongest written installment in the series so far, but as I feared, the weaknesses in a first draft, such as the show is, all came together in this episode, undermining what should have been a very powerful chapter in the overall story. I saw exactly where the showrunners intended each and every emotional beat to land, and some did, but a lot fell flat. And the battle is one that I can't wait to see other people discuss, because while it was fun, and yes, it was a fun fight to watch, it was also a battle that had me laughing half the time at how bad it was. And I'll get to that once we've covered the spoilery overview and the lore as it's been utilized in the series. But first, there are two things that I need to talk about, that I need to get off my chest, and then we shall proceed with our usual review and analysis. The first thing is this. I actually need to give a correction to my previous review and analysis for episode 5, when I was talking about all of the things that they got wrong with Mithril and how it just went against the spiritualism of what Tolkien put into his story. I brought up absolute evil versus absolute good. I actually came across a really neat interview with Tolkien back in 1962, if I recall that correctly, where he talked about absolute good and evil. And what he said is that he believed in absolute good, but not necessarily in absolute evil. So I went back and I thought about things a little bit right here, and it actually makes good sense. If you approach it from a philosophical point, if there is absolute good and absolute evil, they kind of cancel each other out. In which case then, well, what is there? Because without good or evil, you don't really then have everything that comes with that opposition. So from Tolkien's point of view, you have absolute good, that is God. And even Lucifer, the devil, was once an angel. So therefore, he is not entirely evil. Yes, he is evil. Oh, he is horribly evil. But he is not as powerful or as great as God. Same thing with Sauron or Morgoth. They were at one point good, but they became incredibly evil. But they could never be greater than Iluvatar and his grand plan for creation, and whatever he has intended for all of his children. The Valar, the Maiar, the elves, the humans, and his adopted children, the dwarves. And as such, Iluvatar, with his grand plans, allows for things to unfold in ways that not even the wise upon Middle Earth can foresee, and thereby great things can happen, and even almost undefeatable evil like what Sauron is, and the cracks of doom, the fact that even the light of the Silmarils, the light of Valinor, can be quenched in his presence. That's how evil he is. Iluvatar, in his grand infinite wisdom, still had a plan in order to defeat the great evil, and even though it seemed like all hope was lost, there was still hope to be had. A great central message to Tolkien overall. So I'm really glad that I came across that interview. It helps set me straight, and it puts just into even greater context just some of the amazing things that Tolkien put into the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Whew, I loved it. And yes, I get things wrong. I am willing to accept that. You can actually go and you can look through some of the videos that I've done in the past. There are a couple of videos where I admit that, yeah, I got some things wrong. It happens. We're all human, and I'm willing to own up to it. Rings of Power, are you willing to own up to your mistakes? Now, the next thing I have to say is unfortunately not as fun or as cool. I mean, some people are going to take this as like, yes, we're winning! But let's put everything here into proper context. If the numbers are to be believed, the Rings of Power is falling apart. Millions of people are no longer watching it. More and more articles are coming out from the mainstream media attacking the show that they once defended. And all the while, more and more people online are saying that they're just growing tired of watching it. Or they're even growing tired of watching YouTubers tear at a new one because they're they're sad and annoyed that something so bad has been allowed to exist. And they're like, look, the fact that the Rings of Power are so bad and that's been allowed to exist and persist for this long just implies that nothing good can come from it. So what a lot of people are seeing. I mean, I've even seen that in some of the comments for my videos, as well as for many other people's videos. Now then, I don't know what all of this will mean in the long run, but I will be shocked if the Rings of Power is given radical changes in Season 2 to try and save the series. I just don't know if that's going to happen, to be all honest. But one thing I do know is this, and it has been corroborated with conversations that I've had with people from Arizona, to Brazil, to Portugal, to Nigeria, to Russia, to Australia, is that creatives and regular fantasy fans all over the world are observing a degradation in creativity. Not just in the Rings of Power, but kind of overall. Fiction is a spark of inspiration. It is the miracle of creation and imagination that anyone can experience and enjoy. However, it is a spark that is easily stomped out. Too many children and too many teens these days are encouraged to conform to one ideology or another and crush their own imagination so they can hurriedly grow up and become contributing adults. As if adults don't have imaginations of their own? Here's the thing, I've seen this play out in the school where I taught. It's a very real thing, and I'm seeing more and more of it, and I'm hearing more and more of it from other people. And it's not just the kids. So many older fans and creators are also getting ground down into the dirt by strange demands from all sides. Massive corporations are setting soulless standards, and money-grabbing people are just kind of taking advantage of creativity and just going for the lowest common denominator in order to make a quick buck. And we are seeing that a rising generation of creatives are forgetting how to dream. The Rings of Power is a representation of all of this. It is at best a bland fantasy entertainment story that has no soul. And what I mean by that is that it has no way of truly resonating with people on a positive, emotional, or intellectual level. And it has no enduring message beyond consume this product. And as an author, I cannot allow this to stand. Fantasy is essential to growing up and being an individual. Fantasy is liberating, it is empowering, it is ennobling, it is educating, and so many other positive-ing words. Even though we're gathered here for this video to review and analyze episode 6 of The Rings of Power, I am going to quickly give you 5 suggestions for shows, movies, or books that are way more fun than The Rings of Power and will once again ignite that spark of imagination and creativity that we all so desperately need. My first recommendation is The Candy Shop Wars by Brandon Mull. This book series is hilarious, it is great, yes, it is written for young kids, but the action, the imagination, and especially the darker moments within the books are basically universal. Anyone at any age can appreciate it, and plus it's so much fun to see how candy is weaponized. Like having little mint balls that allow you to breathe ice beams, little fireball spicy candies that allow you, of course, to belch fireballs, but also animal crackers that when you eat them you summon animals. It's really cool. Or pixie sticks that allow you to like possess toys and control them with your mind. There's some really cool stuff in the Candy Shop Wars. It's a highly imaginative series and I definitely recommend it. My second recommendation is Bullet Train. I've gone and I've watched this movie twice. It is fantastic. It actually uses the Mary Sue trope in the story, and it actually uses it to brilliant effect to subvert that very same trope. I'm not going to give away spoilers, but you definitely got to watch it to see what they do to their Mary Sue character. It is brilliant. And if you can, check out the original Japanese book. It has been translated into multiple languages. It's there to read. It is a fantastic story of assassins. Definitely worth your time. My third recommendation is the anime Summertime Rendering. I don't care if you don't like anime, or if anime robbed you blind and stole your girlfriend, you gotta watch this show. It is a brilliant psychological thriller with some really neat supernatural elements thrown into it. And with each progressing chapter, it just gets crazier and wilder, and yet it makes sense with so many mysteries that are introduced and then solved at really neat opportunities, which then begin to expand the world and the story even more. It follows a young man who comes back to his hometown to attend the funeral of his best friend, and everyone is treating it like an accident, But a couple of people say, no, it was a murder. And as he begins to figure out who this murderer is, it blows open this huge scandal and plot that could possibly endanger everyone in town. And you can't know who to trust at first. Oh, it's so good. Summertime Rendering, definitely worth a watch. My fourth recommendation is Amazon's Jack Reacher. If you want proof that Amazon has actually done good shows, or at least has stamped their label onto a good show, check out the show Reacher. It is amazing. I love the writing for this. You have such strong characters, and it basically plays to all of the same boxes that the Rings of Power so happily and proudly ticks off about diversity, strong women, and the likes. This show proves that you can have all of that and that it can be amazing. It's not just something that people tick off and say, well, now I have that in my story. My story is now better for it. No, Reacher incorporates a wide cast of great characters, brilliant writing, and just really excellent pacing that pushes forward a fantastic murder mystery plot. Oh, it's so good. And my last recommendation is one of my own books, Bleed, Steam, and Steel. Yes, I am going to advocate for that. It's a great story. I'm just going to say this. I, as the author, I know what I wrote in this book. I know all of the other details that are not in that book. I know what's supposed to happen before, what happened before, and what happens after. But when I read this book, I feel like I am someone in the audience and that I'm experiencing it for the first time. It follows 4 separate heroes on their different journeys that seem pretty separate from each other, but end up culminating together in a grand revelation. But one of the coolest stories that I wrote for Bleed, Steam, and Steel is the adventures of the young samurai warrior Asuka, who finds herself in a really horrible situation, torn between duty to family and honor, as her family's about to go destitute, and the only way to basically save themselves is to either offer up their steam-powered mech suit for sale and try to redeem the family from absolute debt, or to engage in really high-stakes duels against her rivals. And, of course, we know that you don't get the action without Asuka facing off against her rivals, but the journey of her going against her rivals is a journey of herself, a journey towards friendship, and a journey of the family. And it's just, I really enjoyed writing the story, and everyone who's had a chance to read it and has given me feedback has said that Asuka is one of their favorite characters that I have written, and just in general, a really, really awesome girl to follow in her adventure. So those are my 5 suggestions right there. With all that being said, let's now finally dive into this review and analysis for episode 6 of The Rings of Power. Alright, so in case you don't know what the deal already is here, in these reviews and analyses, what I first do is I give a spoilery overview of the events within the episode. I then discuss the use of lore, or as I said in the last episode, it's basically what have they stolen from the beaten up corpse of Tolkien and decided to stitch into their whole cloth. Because really, they've gone so far off the range at this point that this can hardly be even termed fanfiction. But I will still discuss lore, how they've used it and abused it. I will then also have a look at why Tolkien wrote what he did, as far as that lore is concerned. I will then talk about this story as if it were completely original content. Let's step away from the lore and see how this story stands on its own merits, and then I will talk about what kind of advice we can get from all of this as writers. So, spoilery overview. For one thing, this episode is definitely the tightest written of all of them. And it helps that we're finally bringing all of these different stories together, minus the Harfoots and Elrond and Durin, but we're finally bringing all these different people together in order to make one cohesive story, one big cohesive battle. And so, let me just quickly focus then on kind of the little small things that lead up to the battle, and that is that we've got the Númenóreans sailing with their 3 ships on over to Middle-earth. They're bringing 300 cavalrymen in order to liberate the Southlands and put Halbrand onto the throne of the Southlands. Whoop-de-doo. We have Isildur sharing an indirect kiss with his horse. This was kind of weird, and I really cringed when I saw how he was feeding the apple to his horse, because I have fed horses. You do not curl your fingers around what you're feeding them, because a horse will bite and it will hurt. I don't think anyone told this actor, and I'm really glad that he wasn't afraid of being up to that horse, because youch, that could have been really bad. In any case, he goes and he talks with Galadriel, and Galadriel is like, I see Middle-earth, we are coming. And Galadriel tries to sound really wise, and Galadriel also has different moments where she's talking with where she later on talks with Halbrand about how they shouldn't go after revenge, which is all really worthless because that's a hypocritical thing for her to say, because she is all about the revenge. She told us that in episode 5, and oh boy, we're going to see it again in this episode. But the Númenóreans are coming, and they are going to arrive at the first light of the day and save everyone. Huzzah! Now then, where we get most of the action is in the Southlands, where the villagers are with Bronwyn and Arondir and Theo, and they've decided to abandon the Elven fortress, which was once probably Sauron's fortress, and go back into the village. They've pulled all of the orcs up to the fortress, and they've rigged the place. Actually, it's kind of silly, and I'll get into why this is really silly, but the place is rigged to collapse. They let the enemy come on in, and then Arondir destroys the ropes that are holding the tower together, and the tower falls apart and smashes a bunch of orcs. He escapes down, and then the orcs, as they are recovering during the night and into the day, this gives the villagers a whole day to fortify their village and be ready for the fights. And Arondir and Bronwyn share a romantic moment. I'll get a little bit more into this when I talk about the original content here within this story, but they share a romantic moment as they get ready to fight for the night, promising that they will plant these seeds and they will grow them together in a garden. Once the battle is done, they will finally be a happy family. Arondir and Bronwyn are not going to be ashamed that they are lovers. Or are they going to tell Theo about his parentage? In any case, the orcs come in the night, and as they come on in, the villagers spring their trap, throwing flaming carts at them, blocking them on in, and the orcs then have to beat their way through the hail of arrows that are coming, and the wall of flame, and then they have hand-to-hand combat with the villagers, and it's a hard-fought fight. Arondir finds himself in this really ridiculous wrestling match with a really, really big orc. This orc should not be that big. They have this really silly wrestling match. He should have died multiple times in this fight, but he's got plot armor, so he just gets thrown around. He stabs a splinter into this orc's eye. The orc pulls it out and tries to jam it into his eye. And then Bronwyn comes up from behind and stabs the orc through the throat with a short sword or a broken spear. It's hard to say. And then they realize that, huzzah, they've won, they've beaten the orcs. But then when they start looking, they find out most of these orcs are actually their fellow villagers dressed up as orcs. And then arrows fly in from all sides. And then they flee into the tavern. And then the orcs besiege the tavern. Adar breaks his way through, and he holds them all at knife point and at sword point, and he threatens to kill Bronwyn, who has been wounded by arrows, unless he is handed the sword hilt that he needs for his grand plan, which at this point we still don't know what it is. We don't know what Adar is really and truly after. But then we hear the thundering hooves of the horses of Númenor, and Adar tells Waldron, I think is his name. It's the tavern keeper. The guy's like, have you heard of him, lad? Have you heard of Sauron? And he keeps on throughout this entire episode being like, Sauron this, Sauron that. You know, you'd think that I ship myself with Sauron. I kind of do. Have you seen my tattoos? In any case, he's given the sword hilt and he runs off, which will be important for later on. The Númenóreans come and they basically go bowling with orcs. Hey, bowling for orcs. You can turn to Channel 42 and watch that every Friday night. But the Númenóreans come. They quickly make decent work of the orcs, thrashing them. More on that when I cover original content and what we can learn as novice writers from these scenes. But they quickly do their work, and Adar is captured as he flees from Galadriel, and Halbrand comes on in, knocks out the legs of Adar's horse, making sure that the horse isn't injured. Good on you, Halbrand. You just seem like such a swell guy. And they capture them. They capture him, and Halbrand's ready to kill Adar. And then Galadriel's like, no, remember, no revenge. Which then she proceeds to tie him up in a barn. It ties up Adar in a barn and basically is torturing him and threatening to murder all of his children in front of him and then kill him last. You're such a hero, Galadriel. You're totally right about not going for revenge, which she brings up that she wants revenge against all the orcs. Oh boy, the inconsistencies in the writing of this character, or I should say the consistencies in that she's awful. But we learn some interesting things right here. We learn that Adar is supposed to be one of the very first orcs, or as he calls himself, an Uruk, and that he has just been trying to give the orcs a homeland, and that he himself killed Sauron in revenge for all of the orcs that perished under Sauron's experiments up in the north, and that's why Sauron isn't around. And Galadriel's like, I don't believe it! I don't believe it! If I can't kill Sauron, no one could have killed Sauron! Which is kind of saying something, because she led what was basically the dregs of a destroyed army to the north to kill Sauron. So, yeah, again, we're going to come back to that in the original content. But so we finally learn what Adar's after, to create a homeland for the orcs. That is going to require awakening Mount Doom, and the way to do that is by taking the sword hilt, and not using it to conduct some sort of crazy spell or experiment to take over the minds of everyone, but basically to lower the dam that holds back the water and spill it into the valley, and the orcs, with all their tunnels and trenches, can guide that water right into the heart of Mount Doom and ignite the lava there? Yeah, that doesn't quite make sense, even if with a giant steam bomb. As we know from Mole from Atlantis, if you're going to make a volcano erupt, you need great magnitudes of force in order to do that. So, giant steam bomb, I don't quite buy it. But anyway, Mount Doom erupts. Adar is happy. The orcs are happy as a massive wave of hot ash covers the entire land, creating Mordor and consuming the Southlanders and the Númenóreans in just this blast of hot ash. And Galadriel looks on in resigned defeat. It's kind of hard to say what they're trying to do with her right here. It's like a, oh, I've lost kind of a moment. So that's what losing feels like. And we're going to get to that when we talk about the original content. But that right there, that is the entire episode. Now then, we can go into the minutia of the battle, and that might be for a conversation later on. Alright, so now then, let's talk about lore right here. What have they taken from Tolkien and completely used and abused? Well, we actually have some interesting things right here that work as far as the lore goes. Now then, for those of you who are eagle-eyed fans of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, you will realize that there are tons of member berries that were brought in from the movies. Now then, without the proper context, a lot of these member berries don't actually make any sort of sense, and indeed, sometimes they're quoting things from the movies that actually go against the lore. So, yeah. This is definitely not very lore accurate. But some of the things that they, again, get right is that the orcs are made from dark, twisted elves. Now then, the show tries to say that Adar is one of the first, and I actually kind of like that idea, that he was one of the very first elves to be captured by Morgoth and to be twisted and turned into an orc. As we see, his blood has gone black. It's one of the reasons why he's so wonky and weird, and it's cool. I like the idea, actually, and it stands to reason that there might still be some original orcs around. Now then, one of the things that the show does get wrong is the idea of the Uruks. The Uruks do not exist during the Second Age, nor the First Age. They would not call themselves that. The Uruks are an invention of Sauron's and Saruman's. Saruman actually takes it to the next level, but Sauron, after so many ages of dealing with orcs, he's like, you know what? They need to be better. They can't just be these wimpy little goblins that get thrashed by elves and men. I need something better. And so Sauron basically initiates a breeding plan and magic in order to help breed generations of stronger orcs. orcs. They stand taller, they're sturdier, they're basically now very tall, very buff goblins. But they're not yet the Uruk-hai. Saruman turns the Uruks into Uruk-hai by crossbreeding them with men or with the offspring of regular men and orcs, which is really, really creepy to think about. Yeesh! Talk about your breeding programs here, but that's basically where the Uruks and the Uruk-hai come from. They are not part of the Second Age. They are seen as an improvement by both Sauron and Saruman in engineering the perfect army to take over all of Middle-earth. Now then, one thing I do want to bring up, the idea of Udun. Udun is hell. So when we think about like when Gandalf is at the bridge of Khazad-dûm and he's facing off against the Balrog, and he says, "I'm the wielder of the sacred fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor. Dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun." It is actually a challenge from one Maiar to the other, where Gandalf is basically declaring to someone who would recognize the Balrog, "I am a Maia, you are a Maia. I stand with the Valar and with Iluvatar, you stand with Morgoth and with Sauron. And we have defeated you once before. Udun, Utumano fell to the Valar, fell to light. The original hell has been destroyed. You will be destroyed as well unless you go back to the shadow from whence you came." That is what Gandalf is declaring to the Balrog. It's a really cool moment, and when you understand the context and the history, it makes it even better. In this episode, to call the episode Udun, it's to reference hell, and Adar is trying to create his own hell here in Mordor, one that will allow him to basically bring all of the orcs into a new homeland, something that they really haven't had since the fall of Thangorodrim, which was then the second hell that was created by Morgoth during the First Age of the Sun and the Moon. So really cool. I mean, it was actually kind of in existence before that already. It was actually Sauron's fortress until Morgoth came and claimed it, but didn't really become the second hell until he arrived with the Silmarils. And that's me getting into the little minutia there of the ancient history of Middle-earth. So it's kind of neat to have all of this right here. The problem is that this is not how Mordor came into being. Mordor is actually a really neat geological anomaly in that with its massive mountains that box everything in, really like a box, except for the opening which leads to the Sea of Rune. It's a natural barrier that actually traps the fumes that are created by Mount Doom as it breaks and cracks open the earth and everything like that. It's just a natural volcano that's thankfully blocked in on 3 different sides by high mountains, so that way most of the disgustingness from Mount Doom can't flow on over into Gondor. And so it's contained kind of all in one desert, which is kind of a good place for the orcs to be, but not necessarily, because in such an environment you can't grow enough food to support a massive civilization. This is why the Sea of Rune, which is right next door, is so important, because that inland sea creates very fertile plains that are then worked by slaves under Sauron to then feed his massive orc civilization within Mordor. So with Mordor comes with a lot of geological advantages for the orcs and for Sauron, for living purposes and for defensive purposes, and for keeping things kind of secret because the enemy can't see what you've got going on unless they go way around deep into enemy territory and try to come from the east through the Sea of Rune, which is controlled by Sauron. But it does again come at the drawback of not having everything that you need in order to feed a massive civilization, so Sauron must have the entire eastern and southern lands of Middle-earth under his control in order to feed such a massive army. It's really neat because Tolkien did put in all of this effort to justify a really massive civilization that honestly shouldn't exist within these certain conditions. And he brings up the fact that Sauron uses immense amounts of orc and slave labor in order to make Mordor actually function. And this is something right here that kind of goes a little bit against what we see here with Adar's plan. It's a great plan to create a homeland for the orcs, but this homeland already should have existed, and it's one that can't actually sustain a massive amount of orcs. They will need the resources from further east and from the south, or if they wish to conquer Gondor and then take the resources of Gondor in order to feed Mordor. So yeah, there's economics going on right here, and that's woefully missing here within this episode. And yeah, there really wasn't a whole lot in the way of lore that was referenced here within this episode. Most of it was misquoted or misused. So let's have a look then here at what Tolkien was doing here with the orcs. And this actually comes back to what I was bringing up here at the very beginning when I said, look, I got it wrong. Tolkien said he didn't believe in absolute evil. And this brings up something about the orcs that is kind of played around here within this episode and could have actually really been explored if the show was willing to really dive deep into orc culture. So the orcs are made from elves who were taken, twisted, and mutilated by Morgoth. We don't know how he did it. Tolkien would never give up any idea as to how he did it. I don't think Tolkien would even try to imagine how Morgoth did it. It's just this vague evil thing, and he writes that it was the worst thing that Morgoth could have ever done, forcing the children of Iluvatar to become evil, not through their choices, but through force, through wicked, twisted force. This helps to show just how wicked and evil, wicked and evil, it's the same exact thing, just how bad ultimately Morgoth was as an individual, how he truly fell from grace, and that this was the one thing that all the elves could agree on, that this was unforgivable, what he had done to their people. Now then, because the elves knew that the orcs are basically cousins of theirs, elves understand the sanctity of life, and even they are willing to give orcs actually a second chance. Within the book The Hobbit, actually, we read passages about how the elves would even treat orcs with a certain amount of kindness because they believe in life. Something that Galadriel definitely doesn't care about, but the elves cared about letting life have a chance. Because Tolkien himself even said that maybe given a certain chance, there would be orcs who would be willing to actually do something good. But it would take a lot of work and a lot of time to undo the evil of generations, of millennia that had been wrought upon them and by them. So the path to redemption would be really great. It would be really difficult. And what the show is actually doing with Adar by trying to create a homeland for them could actually be a step in that positive direction. It would be a very interesting thing to explore. Tolkien himself doesn't really explore it. He leaves it open as a philosophical debate and question. We do have chances to see a little bit more about orc culture within various societies, and we see that orcs really don't like getting along with each other, but when they do, they form some pretty interesting bands and friendships that can actually be very beneficial. They are very intelligent. They know how to work all kinds of machines. They can delve like dwarves. They are long-lived like the elves, and so they can put all of that great time to great use. And there's a lot that can be explored with the orcs. Tolkien himself, though, didn't really do that because Tolkien wanted to explore more the ideas of heroism, messages of hope and faith, of fellowship, of honor, of duty. And the orcs don't really represent that, and he depicts them as such. And so they make fantastic bad guys because they stand as complete opposites of all the good things that we see in the heroes. But the door is still left open for orcs to potentially be redeemed, and that is shown in the philosophy that the elves treat the orcs with kindness. So there's some really neat stuff going on here that can be explored in fan fiction such as The Rings of Power if you're willing to put in the time and the effort. Unfortunately, I don't think that we're actually going to see that here in the show. Now then, let's talk about original material. Let's pretend that Tolkien never existed, that the Lord of the Rings had never been written, that all of this lore just is magically gone. And let's then consider the show as completely original. That J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay are geniuses who wrote all of this stuff up and didn't have to borrow or take anything. Well, let's dive into this episode. This episode is a really interesting one because it is a culmination chapter. And I've brought this up before in other videos where I've talked about how culminations are when you bring all different kinds of characters and plot threads together for a grand moment where everything comes to a head and we begin to see the fulfillment of character arcs and overarching plot arcs and stuff like that. And this episode is meant to do that. It's meant to finally give us a little bit of fulfillment about Elendil and his family, about Galadriel and Halbrand going on their personal journeys, the Queen Regent really kind of taking charge and truly being a leader who's doing what she thinks is best for Middle-earth as a whole, and then coming to terms with her father's prophecy that only darkness will she find there. We get to see the relationships of Arondir, Bronwyn, and Theo. We get to see the tavern guy finally kind of fulfill some sort of weird, warped, twisted wish to show his love for Sauron. We get to finally now learn a little bit more about Adar and what's happening there with the orcs. Everything is coming together except for Meteor Man and the Harfoots. And, of course, also what's happening with the Mithril, with Elrond and Durin, which is just frustrates me because that's such a breach of lore. But again, we're talking about this as if it were original stuff. So most of the stories are finally coming together. This should be a very impactful chapter within the overall story. And in fact, I can even see the overall skeleton. I see all of the different points of where Arondir and Bronwyn are basically accepting that now they're going to come into the light and that they're not going to try to hide it anymore, that they are a couple. And we have Theo coming to accept Arondir, Arondir accepting Theo, and now they're supposed to become a great big happy family. We have Halbrand and Galadriel finally showing some sparks of romance between each other, and we expect that now that's going to go somewhere kind of interesting. And yeah, it's neat to learn what Adar has in store. Finally we have information about who he is and what his plans are, and then everything goes kaboom at the end and it looks like the bad guys have won. This would actually be a really interesting place to end the season, but there are still 2 more episodes to go, a lot of ground to still cover, and so it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And in fact, actually, that's actually kind of cool, because what would normally be a season ender is happening while there's still a quarter of the season left to go, and so you're like, ooh, what can happen next? It is a smart way to go about things. The problem is this: the setup was awful. They have spent 5 episodes, more than 5 hours, to introduce all of these characters, to set up all of this stuff, and yet there are a ton of problems. I have said this repeatedly, that this show is basically a first draft, and now all of the problems of a first draft are coming together because of all of the different mistakes and inconsistencies and things that weren't properly set up are now all coming together to undermine what should be an epic moment. So here are some of the things that were not set up well at all. The romance between Arondir and Bronwyn was absolutely not there. I actually really wanted this subplot to work out. I was very interested in seeing where this would go. But I kid you not, there's only 10 seconds across 5 episodes, more than 5 hours, 10 seconds that actually sold me that there was romance and chemistry between them. Other than that, it was really, really bad soap opera romance that made me cringe. That felt absolutely forced. And I'm not even going to blame it on the actors, even though some of the acting was really ham-fisted. The writing was just awful. I didn't feel anything for Arondir and Bronwyn's relationship at all. And as a result, I didn't care about the fact that Bronwyn was dying on the table. I honestly didn't. Because she's not a well-developed character, her relationship with Arondir is not well-developed, and on top of that, her relationship with her son is not well-developed. This episode is where we got the most emotion for it, the most feelings between them, and Theo is still a sweaty teenage jerk. In fact, he's a crackhead, as we come to find out at the end of this episode, because he lusts for the power of that sword hilt. Let me sniff it some more, please, Arondir. And Arondir gives it to him. Let me just, I have to just take a moment and say, like, that's stupid. When someone has an addiction, you don't give them the drug and say, Okay, go throw it away. I'm going to go away now. I'm going to trust that you're going to do the right thing. No! Oh, that was so stupid. And how Theo's like, I get to now hold the sword hilt, my precious. Oh, please forgive my sweaty hands for corroding you even further. And then he finds out it's a little hatchet thing. And then he's disappointed. He's not even scared. He's disappointed that it's not the crack that he wanted. Theo is an awful character. There's nothing really done to redeem him, and there's nothing done to develop the relationship that he has with his mother. Therefore, the moment then where they are trying to hug and kiss and they're getting ready for the battle, and then during the battle when Bronwyn has been grievously injured and looks like she's about to die, I felt nothing during those scenes. In fact, I kind of snorted a bit derisively because I knew that I was being baited, that she wasn't going to die. I would have been impressed if they had let her die, but of course they weren't going to do that. And because then there was no emotional weight then for this scene to rest on, it just fluttered off as a ridiculousness. And that's because across 5 episodes, they did not properly set up these relationships. Yes, I know they existed. Were they set up well? Were they well developed? Absolutely not. And this was a subplot I wanted to succeed. I really did. I might not have liked the rest of the show going on into it from the beginning, but I actually wanted this to succeed. And the fact that this was something I was rooting for, it makes it even worse. Let's then talk about another emotional moment that only lands well because the actor for Elendil is carrying every scene he's in. He's a phenomenal actor working with an awful script. Elendil and his children. I don't even know what's happening with his daughter. Everything to do with his daughter is fluff that should be developed but isn't. Therefore, I don't really get what's happening with his family. And then when they bring up, mother died. I learned stuff about her from horses. It would have been nice to know more about the mother ahead of time. Show us some real conflict about Elendil not talking about his wife and how that really is putting a strain on the family. It's hinted at, it's brought up in one scene, but beyond that, it's one scene. It's not very well developed. And then what the lines that have been given to Isildur and everything are just so cringe. This show is beating this poor boy down and making him an absolute idiot with almost no redeeming qualities other than his spunk. And then when the queen being all like, hey, son, ride off to save your father. That was a scene that I would have loved. In fact, I would have loved it more if Isildur is like the queen's like, no, we are in reserve. And then he's like, screw this, my father's being attacked. Charge! To show that even though he continuously breaks the rules and he goes against orders, his heart is in the right place. But that wasn't there. A lot of the emotional setup was just not there. We don't know about Elendil's family. The only thing that carries the scene is that the actor for Elendil just plays the gruff father so well that we see that he's proud of his son and that he's thankful that his son came to save him, and he's so glad, he's carrying his lucky stars that he allowed his son to come on this expedition. Other than that, tell me, what do you really know about Elendil's family? What does Isildur really want? A lot of people are scratching their heads. What does Isildur really want? What does Elendil really want? We don't really know. The family dynamic is not well set up. Then we have another moment that should have landed really well, Halbrand and Galadriel. The problem is that Galadriel is all about revenge. She has said so multiple times, and anytime that she says something different, you know it's hypocritical, and you come to hate the character even more. So when she and Halbrand are sharing a moment about how she's happy that he helped her to catch Adar, and that he held her back from slitting Adar's throat and killing him for good, and that he's happy that she prevented him from getting his revenge against Adar for whatever happened, that there's supposed to be an emotional moment right here. And we can tell that Halbrand's kind of feeling it because we know for a longest time that he's kind of had the hots for Galadriel. But from Galadriel herself, she's already said the only thing that she feels is revenge. So when she's like, I felt something, it's like, dear, what you're feeling is the horny. I am not convinced that you felt anything good because the setup has told me across 5 episodes from Galadriel's own mouth that all she feels is revenge and darkness. And so it would be sweet to buy into this fact that Halbrand is now a light in her life. But across 5 episodes of telling us that everything that Galadriel does is right and perfect, that she's not doing anything wrong, and she craves this revenge, you're sending so many mixed signals and hypocrisy that it's just, you can't get invested in this character. I'm actually invested in Halbrand. That scene landed well for me for Halbrand, even though I know the guy is Sauron, because it definitely ties into the fact that in the lore, Sauron does try to be good at one point, and that is brought up in the series, which I was glad that they brought that up, that Sauron tried to atone for his sins and everything, which is lore accurate, so I'll give it that. But if we talk about this in original context right here, Halbrand is on a hero's journey. Whether he be Sauron or someone else, though we know he's Sauron, he's on a hero's journey of his own. And this is a very important moment in his development because he wants to actually have something good in his life. And for him, he thinks Galadriel's something good. But we know she's bad, which is just, oh man. So the setup is not working well for so many of these scenes. And then for when Adar gets what he wants, Mount Doom is awoken. It was a cool scene. I will absolutely give it that. I mean, I do kind of question why Sauron had a really weird fortress and dam built that through a magical sword you can lower the dam and release the water. To what end? The world building for that doesn't really make any sense. And neither does it make sense that water ignites and causes a volcano to blow up. That is just dumb. There has to have been a better way of doing this. You mean, you guys have already introduced all different kinds of odd magic that is not in the lore. You know what? Go back to the whole transmutation circle idea. We have surrounded the volcano with this crazy magical circle, and now we have filled it with water that is cursed by Sauron's own hand, and we will initiate a spell to awaken the volcano. Kaboom. If you had gone with something like that, people would have bought it. Creating a massive steam bomb with igniting water? Yeah, no. It's dumb. I'm sorry, but it's dumb. And what's also dumb is this. We only learn about Adar's identity and his plans after he's been defeated. That's really dumb. That's really, really dumb. I know that these writers are going for the whole mystery box thing. Ooh, what could it be? What could it be? What could it be? What could it be? It's so frustrating. In fact, actually, you could have really built up the momentum and the fear of this particular moment. And you could have actually done it kind of back like in episode 3, where you have Arondir meeting up with Adar, and you could have the conversation going back and forth, and Arondir could be like, why are you doing this? What are you and your orcs doing here? And Adar could then say something to the effect of, after Morgoth was defeated, half of Middle-earth sank into the ocean. Beleriand was wiped out, and the elves had Lindon and its many other lands to go to. The dwarves had Moria and Khazad-dûm to go back to. Even men had kingdoms to fall back on. But what about the orcs? There was no place for them to go. They've been scattered and hunted for hundreds of years. And so, I, as their father, desired to give them a homeland. And then, so Arondir's like, so you plan on conquering the Southlands? And then Adar says, think bigger, my friends. We are just digging the hole for the foundation. And leave it like that, where then you're like, okay, so we now know that this is all part of creating a homeland for the orcs, and they're planning on doing something with this trench. That's really something to keep an eye on. That's important. And Adar could drop some other clues and whatnot, so we then already know what his goal is. And then leaves you then wondering, okay, well, who is this elf to then work with these orcs? And he could drop and there could be other hints that are dropped through various conversations between Adar and the orcs. Those would have been actually good moments to reveal certain things that then you could bring all these different elements together as he then reveals who he truly is to Galadriel. And he could just be all like, and then as she's interrogating him, he could just be all like, have you wondered why I allowed myself to get caught? And she's like, you didn't allow yourself. You were cornered by me and Halbrand. And then he could then say, no. You see, Galadriel, scourge of the orcs, I knew you could not resist chasing after me. And so all this time, as you've been hunting killing me and talking with me and hurting me. All this time, you have allowed one lone warrior to bring down all of your efforts and all of your armies. And then Galadriel could be like, what? And then we could then get to the tavern guy being like, for Sauron! Using the sword and then lowering the dam and unleashing the water. This could have been a very impactful, powerful moment if it had been set up differently. And again, I'm just kind of spitballing here. I did not write any of this down. I'm just like, oh yeah, no, like looking at this is what doesn't work and this is how it might work. This is at least how I would do it. So yeah, a lot of the emotional, powerful moments, or at least the ones that should have been emotional and powerful, just really didn't land at all. And as such then, this episode could only rely on its action to carry it through because almost all of the emotional beats were lacking. So now then, this is where we come to talk about the battles. Yes! I love talking about fights. So, oh boy, I was rolling my eyes and laughing for a lot of this stuff right here. However, I will say this, there were some really great moments as far as the battles go. Now then, I'm just going to say this, it was really stupid for them to abandon, it was really stupid for the Southerners to abandon the tower. Even though it was a neat little trap to collapse the entire fortress down on top of the orcs, that was bad because they knew they couldn't catch the entire army in that trap. And so they were giving up their best defensive position, and it really would not have worked well for them. In fact, when you know that you can hold the orcs to one narrow bridge, it gives you so many advantages over them. But no one in this group is actually militarily minded, not even Arondir. Arondir should have known that holding the fortress was a far better option, and that you just basically utilize what you have, and that collapsing the tower is a last-ditch effort as you then get everyone to kind of flee through a back door out beyond the dam, and you try to take down as many orcs as you can and prevent them from easily pursuing you, and then you run for your lives. So that would have been the better thing to do, because a village, especially an open village, is not a defensible position at all. Especially when, oh my gosh, the brook. In any case, I'm going to come back to that. Well then, collapsing the tower was neat. It was a neat idea, but it should have been like a last-ditch resort kind of thing. It should have been a last resort move. I don't like how it was brought down by simply shooting out two ropes. How on earth have these ropes that were so easily burned and shot out held up a massive tower? Those things are heavy. Their own weight holds them in place. And I can speak from experience. I have gone to a dilapidated castle in Austria that was literally leaning over a cliffside. Had that tower finally given while I was up on it, that would have been a 300 to 400 foot drop onto sharp pointy rocks down below. Probably way more than that, actually. But that tower's own weight supported it, even though the foundation was cracking, and so as it's leaning ever so slowly out over this canyon, it would still hold. Oh, that was a freaky adventure. Simply shooting out a couple of ropes, or even just a couple of ropes, will not affect a massive tower. So that was ridiculous right there. And yes, fantasy and everything like that, the rule of cool. The problem is that the rule of cool definitely comes into a lot of contradictory moments here in this episode. There's so many contradictions, especially the fact that the orcs don't burn in the sunlight. They're fighting in the sunlight and they're not burning. Why didn't these orcs come out and fight earlier in the sunlight? Come on, show. In any case, tower crumbling down. Cool idea. Should have been used as a last resort, not as your opening move. Villagers come down to the village. They begin to fortify the village, saying the orcs will not fight during the day. Therefore, it gives us a whole day to prepare. They don't even bother digging trenches or putting up abatis or anything like that, stakes, in order to slow down the orcs. They keep the village pretty open because they feel like the orcs are just going to simply march over this little bridge that covers the brook right outside of Robin Hood's Men in Tights. Seriously, the orcs can just simply step over this little body of water, or they can wade through it. It is not a good defensible position. But they set up this whole trap as though the orcs are just simply going to walk over the bridge, which they do. The orcs are conveniently stupid, and they walk into a stupid trap that no medieval villager would ever use, and that is using fire within your village. You have thatch roofs! If any of those sparks get loose, you are burning down the whole village, and you will kill everyone within it, especially when you put half of the village into the tavern, which is made of wood. That is stupid. So dumb. And if you did go for a fiery cage within a village, you would have a bucket brigade on hand, so that way once the fighting has died down, you can douse those flames as quick as possible, because if you don't, your village is going to burn down, and it could kill a lot of people in the process. So, all of that, that annoyed me to no end. But then the show actually did something smart, that the orcs played smart. The orcs are like, you're setting a trap for us, and we're going to spring that trap using your own people. So that way you kill your own fellow humans, and we will then surround you on all the other sides, and then create a perfect situation where we've got crossfire of arrows, and we can take out most of your people. That was a really cool move. I really enjoyed that. That was good. The orcs then come, they swarm into the town, and basically do what you're supposed to do in sacking the town. Now then, I don't think it was a smart idea to have Adar be like, someone just hand me the sword hilt, just kill everyone. Kill everyone and you can get the sword hilt. It's really simple to search dead bodies because they don't fight back. So that was dumb. The strategy that Adar employs, very smart. Interrogating everyone was really dumb. Sure, it makes him look like the bad guy. Yes, it was fun to watch the orcs slowly stick people and bleed them out, but it was a good villainous move. But the smarter villainous move would have been to just simply to kill everyone and then loot the corpses. Be like D&D players. Kill everyone first, then ask questions later as you loot the bodies. But then the Númenóreans come on in and play bowling with the orcs. The whole chain thing is just absolutely ridiculous. Once again, rule of cool right here. Wouldn't it be so cool if two guys came with chains like you see in that one scene in The Walking Dead where they have the cars and the wires and they go and they kill a whole bunch of zombies? What if we did that with orcs? It sounds like a really cool idea, but because you have decided to not make Númenóreans really awesome fighters like they are in the books, therefore, normal people, normal horses would not be able to just simply plow through scores of people with chains. You would actually get caught and you would pull people on down. This is one of the things that most people don't quite realize when it comes to cavalry charges. Cavalry soldiers actually have numerous weapons because their weapons are going to get wrenched from their hands by colliding with people. Force rips weapons away. And so you then need to pull out other weapons in order to start dealing with people. You've got your spears, you have your lances, for that good quick crush of other usually enemy horsemen, or to break the lines of your enemy, and then you then pull out your other weapons, your swords, your short spears or your axes, and then you get in good and you start hacking and slashing on all sides. You use your height advantage and everything like that. Better yet actually would be to have mounted archers, and you pick off the enemy from afar, you break them apart, and then you charge them finally, and you deal with them piecemeal. So that would be the better way of doing it. This is the rule of cool right here. And yes, it did look cool, even though it was ridiculous. The Númenóreans completely crushed the orcs in a village environment, which is absolutely what would happen. This actually plays out really, really well. And the chase for Adar's trick and everything like that does work really well. So that's one of the reasons why this episode's kind of an interesting one right here. All of the emotional beats fail. The action is fun. It actually is a whole lot of fun. If you turn off your brain and you just want to enjoy action, you're going to get it, and it's going to be really good. But if you approach this story from a more logical standpoint, like if you want to make the fight actually make sense within the parameters of your own world, it doesn't work. One of the reasons why it doesn't work, once again, is because of the contradictions. The contradictions in strength, skill, and the fact that the orcs shouldn't be able to fight during the morning, yet they do. Contradictions abound, and that's a problem for this because it weakens the stability of the fight scenes. Yes, they are fun. Yes, they are good. They might not be the most logical. I would write it differently, but hey, to each their own. What you enjoy in a fight is subjective. However, the rules for the world should not be. That is your canon. That's what you hold to. And the canon went out the window for the rule of cool to have an awesome village fight scene, which it was fun to watch, but it was inconsistent. And therefore, over time, this fight will not be well remembered or well liked. And that's a problem, because this episode, once again, was meant to be a very powerful one. Its emotional beats failed. Its action should have been on point. The action was fun, but it was not on point. And therefore, this episode, which as an original piece of content, I did enjoy. I did, but I could not enjoy it as much as I wanted to without turning off my brain. Which, when you're watching this to find advice and lessons for novice authors, well then, everything starts coming apart. So this video is already waxing fairly long, so let's get into the advice that we can gain from this as far as being novice authors go. Consistency. Your canon. I have brought this up in multiple videos before, and I'm going to bring it up again right here. Your canon is your gospel for how you write your story. Yes, the rule of cool exists, but the rule of cool actually works really well when it exists within the canon of your story. So if you're going to have your orcs be like vampires, actually have them be like vampires, where they're like hissing and spitting as they come out into the sun. It's like the rays of the morning are coming. So the orcs now are trying to rally around buildings, which kind of makes it a little bit difficult for the Númenóreans. So you could actually get some really neat house-to-house fighting. It actually would have worked out really well instead of just a slaughter fest out in the open. So yeah, and yeah, towers falling around. Physics go out the window. Yay. But canon is key. Canon allows you to keep everything logical within the bounds of your own story. You can do absolutely incredible, illogical, crazy things that would absolutely never happen in real life. That can be your canon, but you have to stick to it. If you go beyond your canon, things start falling apart. Another bit of writing advice is this. Take your time to set up your emotional moments. It's hard. It takes real plotting and planning, and especially if you are a discovery/garden writer, someone who just kind of comes up with your story without really plotting it out ahead of time, that then means that you have to go back and you have to edit things accordingly to make sure that all of the necessary steps are leading up to that good emotional moment. Allow us time to truly get to know your characters and get to know their internal and interpersonal conflicts. So that way, when the moment comes to resolve them or to address them, to have some catharsis, it actually pays off and your audience knows exactly what this moment is there for, and they have all of this evidence to help back it up, and that just, it really, really pays off, because your audience then has this burden of knowledge, and that emotional moment is kind of like the lock to the key that they've been holding, and they can now insert it, click it, and then receive the reward. That is what you're aiming for right here. This show did not put in the proper steps to forge the right key for these lock moments. And kind of to go along with that, when we look at the character of Galadriel, this episode is meant to be a turning point for Galadriel. It's absolutely meant to be that way. The way that the episode ends with Galadriel embracing defeat and this blast of hot ash, this is meant to be a moment where Galadriel is supposed to be humbled. The thing is that we have received no evidence that she could ever be humbled. Running an entire army ragged, destroying the lives of thousands of elves in pursuit of her own vengeance, being seen as a villain by her own people, basically getting exiled, manipulating people, using the Númenóreans, and doing, honestly, some really awful things. All of this has not had any sort of negative impact on Galadriel in any kind of way. As a result, this 180 turn that's being set up here at the end of this episode is completely incongruent with her character. If you want your character to be redeemed from their faults, you need to show us the positives to their character and show us moments where they could choose to be a better individual. Please tell me where there are moments where Galadriel actually shows something positive about herself that shows that she could change. The horse ride? It just shows that she really enjoys riding on horses. And when she duels the cadets, she is mocking them. She's showing off how great she is. She's not really helping them or training them. So that's not really a good thing. She very very vocally admits to manipulating others. She's not really working with them for their benefit. She's doing it for her own purposes. So when we look at all of this, when we look at the way that she treats people, there's nothing to suggest that she can actually be changed. She is an effective villain. Now then, I'm all for villain redemptions. I really, really am. But you have to show that the villain has redeemable qualities that can be exploited by other characters to help try to turn them on over to the good side. Without that, you can't do a villain redemption. And there's nothing really to suggest that Galadriel can be redeemed. So if Galadriel is indeed humbled going into episode 7 and we see a change in countenance and a change in attitude and a change in approach, I'll be honest, it won't have worked. It will not have worked. It will not have landed properly because it's such a ridiculous 180, again, without the proper setup. You have to know your characters, and if you're going to redeem a character or show that they can fall or whatever, you have to put those elements on in there. They're good and they're bad, and show that to the audience. Without that, you do not do a proper characterization, or you at least don't give any real depth to that character, and they just become a one-dimensional caricature of an idea or of an emotion or of a stereotype. And that's basically then all you have. And I guess I'm going to close with my writing advice on this little bit as far as writing battles. There might be some people who would say, if you're going to write something like this particular episode, which has a lot of action, there are those who say, woof, like, there's no good breathing points, like action, 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 I'm getting exhausted. One thing that I can give this episode, which was good, and that you should definitely take to heart, is having breathing moments between bouts of action. We have the tower falling, and then we then have a moment of rest where the villagers regroup and begin to prepare. We then have the attack, the first attack on the village. They beat that off. There's a brief moment of respite, and then they are then ambushed, which was really great. We then have a moment of the characters. It's not necessarily a break from the tension, but it's a break from the action as Theo and Arondir try to save Bronwyn. And then, boom, Adar comes on in. We then have the Númenóreans coming to the rescue. The fight is won. There's a little bit of a break as characters begin to celebrate, and then Adar's plan is kicked into action. We have action, rest, action with then an easing of tension, more action, rest, final action. That is good, and it's all basically one long day of battling, and you can really write that out. It honestly works. So if you're going to write long actions, moments or chapters of action. In fact, I do this in my book Knights of Halicruz, where I have multiple chapters back to back to back that all revolve in one massive siege, this massive magical siege. There are moments where you have moments of respite after certain battles, or you have a moment of peace before the next stage of the siege where the characters are talking about what they're about to do. We get to see some of their plans, we get to hear their fears, their anxiety before they go on in. Those moments right there kind of help to alleviate the constant roll of action, because if it's just action, you exhaust your audience. You need breaks. That doesn't mean that you stop the battle and go to something else. You can still keep yourself within the environment of the fight, but do something else that isn't constant killing and sword swinging. And that way then you can carry actually a decent amount of momentum and not exhaust your audience. Whew! That was a lot to say. There is a lot to say really about this episode because, well, for once, there's a decent amount of good to talk about. And there's some things I had to say at the beginning, even though I know it's a long introduction, but I felt I had to say it, and I'm glad I had the chance to express it right here. I am interested in seeing what episodes 7 and 8 will bring. Do I feel like this is a turnaround for the entire show? Absolutely not. This show has been an absolute abomination in regards to the legacy of Tolkien and his Legendarium. 100%. This show has no respect for Tolkien. But as an original concept, there is actually something interesting here. And I am more and more convinced that had they not been so preoccupied with trying to be Tolkien and absolutely turning their backs on Tolkien at the same time, had they focused on telling just an original story, this actually could have been a whole lot of fun. if they had done their own world building, wow. And if they had built up their characters properly in unique, interesting ways, this episode would have landed powerfully. It would have been a great culmination episode with fantastic action, fantastic emotional payoff, and there's still 2 more episodes to go, and I'd be like, wow, where are we going next? I can tell that that's what the showrunners were aiming for, but they were so preoccupied with all of their other crap that the rest of the episode became crap as well. Might have been gilded crap, but crap nonetheless. And that's really, really disappointing to see. So I'll see you around for the next episode. If you're looking for more writing advice, though, in the meantime, please check out our other videos here. You can also head on over to our podcast, Camille's Harem, found on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the works. We have more writing exercises for you over at our Pinterest page, and of course, we would love for you to join our ever-growing community of novice authors. Links for all of that and more are in the description below. And I also want to thank all of the people who have recently come aboard this month. We've seen a massive jump in subscribers. Thank you for coming along for the journey. I hope you've been enjoying yourselves. Please comment down below about things that you would like for us to talk about in the future, or carry on some good conversations. Share your own writing insights and experiences. We'd love to have those conversations with you. And again, thank you for joining us on this adventure that we call writing. And until the next episode, the next video, the next installment, whatever y'all choose.